Welcome back, everybody. In this session, this presentation, we're going to be talking about descriptive research and qualitative research. As always, take a look at your to-do list and make sure you're checking the course topics and outline in the schedule to see what other activities or assignments may be due. And take a look at the learning objectives on your own. All right, so what is descriptive research? Well, descriptive research is used to describe a situation, a subject, or behavior. This type of study seeks to answer what is occurring in a particular situation, but does not attempt to find the whys. Descriptive research does not attempt to manipulate variables, and it cannot establish causality. Just as with other research we have discussed so far, descriptive research is guided by a research question or questions and a set of objectives. Descriptive research can be both quantitative and or qualitative. For example, surveys and questionnaires can be analyzed quantitatively, meaning you can find the means to determine each question. So you can determine the means of each question. You may be able to determine the mode or median of the survey scores. You can determine the range of scores, etc. But descriptive research can also be analyzed qualitatively. And an example of this would be open-ended questions on a survey. There are many different types of descriptive research. A case study is an examination of an individual or small sample, and this allows us to take an in-depth look at many of the details about an individual. We gather a lot of information in an effort to explain what is happening. So if any of you have ever watched House, you have witnessed the detailed collection of information about a case or a subject. Each week in the show, the doctors attempt to learn everything about a patient in an effort to determine what is going on with the individual. While this can help us understand what is going on with the individual, it doesn't allow us to generalize this information to a greater population, so this is a limitation of this type of research. Surveys or questionnaires are another type of descriptive research. This method allows us to find out about many people, but it's far less in depth than, say, a case study. Surveys are also open to interpretation, meaning that participants may interpret questions differently from what the researcher meant. So this is a limitation of surveys and questionnaires. Observational methods are another type of descriptive research. Here, subjects are observed without interaction in their natural environment. It's important to note that the researcher typically has no interaction with the subject, so they're purely just observing what's going on. Qualitative research focuses on underlying themes that can be derived from subjects' opinions, motivations, and behaviors. And we're going to talk about that more in just a few minutes. And then normative research describes a typical or standard values for a characteristic of a population. And developmental research describes the developmental changes in behaviors in a population over time. The book talks about one of the earliest known developmental studies, which took place from 1759 to 1777. The study was a longitudinal case report and collected data that chronicled the growth of a child at 6-month intervals. The longitudinal method is often used to document developmental research. Because the research involves changes in behavior, they are often followed up over a period of time, making a longitudinal approach ideal. Cross-sectional studies are also a possible approach, particularly when the researcher is looking at a broad sample and has the ability to measure them all at a particular point in time. Developmental research is particularly helpful in determining natural histories of disease states. This type of information can be helpful in designing experimental studies. For example, the book talks about a study by Godbolt and Associates that documented the 10-year progression of symptoms of Alzheimer's in a family. And Howison and colleagues examined the cognitive decline in elders. These studies help set the groundwork for understanding the effects of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline and allow researchers to anticipate the rate of decline that may be anticipated. Normative studies help describe a typical or standard value for a particular population and characteristic. This means that this type of study looks to make comparisons between a study participant and a known standard value or limits. These are important types of studies as they're used to estimate or predict normal behavior or performance for a characteristic, for example, hand grip or motor skills, or I suppose it could even be used for studying nutrition eating patterns over time. Because these studies are used to predict behavior or performance, it's so important that the results are considered valid reflections of the norm. Because it's hard to predict one single number, these values often are represented in ranges. So here's a question. What do you think of when you think of qualitative research? So, qualitative research is exploratory and descriptive in design and often used when the data can't be reduced to just numbers alone. Qualitative research is more about the understanding of a person's reasons, opinions, feelings, attitudes, and motivations for a particular behavior. Qualitative research uses a subject's own words, so you can easily identify this type of research as you will see quotes or text pulled out in a manuscript, and oftentimes these are italicized. It is important when conducting this type of research to really use the participants' own words in what they say. You may categorize or use their words, thoughts, opinions, you may put them into consistent themes, but you're not changing what they said. You're just perhaps inferring what was meant. Qualitative research is inductive and it's about inference and is subject to research bias as the researcher is assigning meaning to the subject's words. Therefore, it is important to note that analysis and interpretation of this type of research is subjective. Qualitative research is also limited by its lack of generalizability. Because the data are representative of only the person or persons who participate in the study, the results cannot be generalized to other populations. While the results are not generalizable, they are particularly helpful in understanding a topic from the point of view of the participant. These studies often help provide the background for future research and may help guide a researcher in a particular direction. There are many different examples of qualitative research. Interviews are one example. Interviews can be conducted in person, on the phone, and nowadays we can even connect over sources or applications like Skype. The important thing with interviews is that they should be structured. You should have a series of questions, but allow for some flexibility based on participants' responses. There are many aspects of an interview that should be considered, including the venue and seating. It should be comfortable and accessible. The interview should sit close enough to hear, but far away enough away to allow for a comfortable personal space. An interview should include active listening and a concentration by the researcher on what is being said. Eye contact, smiling, nodding are all needed during the interview process so that the interviewee really knows that the interviewer is listening. Another aspect that's really important is asking open-ended questions to help elicit additional information. Try for open-ended questions that start with what, why, and how. Also, repetition is an important part of the interview process, repeating back to the interviewee what was said for clarification. And at the end of the interview, the interviewer should summarize what was said and conclude the session. Focus groups are another common method to gather qualitative data. Focus groups are led by a facilitator who follows a guided series of questions. The role of the facilitator is very important, as they need to move the conversation along without influencing the conversation. The facilitator must also be able to encourage participants to provide information and ask questions that will help the researchers achieve their goals. Facilitators must also understand group dynamics. Questions typically build and allow participants to become comfortable with the setting and answering throughout the process of focus groups. Sessions are often video or audio recorded, and there may be someone there to take notes during the session as well. After each focus group, audio tapes, video recordings, and any notes would be sent out for transcription, and then these transcriptions would be reviewed for possible themes. Ethnographic research is an observational method to study people in their natural environment. This is often used to gain a better understanding of cultures and settings in the context of challenging situations. Ethnographic research relies heavily on the accuracy and the ability of the researcher. So an inexperienced researcher may not understand or capture the nuances needed to really get to the motivations and challenges of the participants. Other examples of qualitative research include the analysis of various mediums, so words, video, text messages, diaries, newspaper clippings, etc. These mediums would be reviewed for themes based on a research question or objective. For example, one of my professors did a qualitative study of current cooking shows looking for the application of proper food safety techniques. Finally, case study research includes the review and presentation of data of a group of people or a single person. For example, a researcher in a hospital setting may present a case study of a single patient. Interviewing and developing questions for surveys is an important part of qualitative research. Take a few minutes to look at the handout that's posted in this session's content folder and identify the problems and potential solutions you would suggest to improve the questions. Answers are also posted, but really try to work through the questions before peeking at the answers. Qualitative research often involves much smaller sample sizes than quantitative research. With qualitative research, a researcher is more interested in reaching a saturation point for data. That is, the point at which more data does not equal more information. Qualitative research is concerned with meaning. Therefore, one piece of data is often enough to provide or infer meaning. This type of research is often very labor-intensive, and therefore it can be very difficult to work with large groups of subjects. Data analysis can take an extensive amount of time due to the large amount of data in the form of narratives. In the past, qualitative data analysis was done by hand. The researcher would review the narratives, highlight themes in a manner that would help them separate out the information. My committee chair used qualitative research in the majority of her dissertation work, and I remember her telling me many times how she had to highlight papers, color code the papers, and then spread that out all over her apartment just so she could track the different themes. Today, we have software programs that help us to do the work. The program I'm familiar with is NVivo. With the program, the data is uploaded, or the narratives are uploaded, and you're able to create different nodes or categories in which you can store segments of the text. This allows you to very easily look at the text and see which fits a particular category or theme. When the data is organized together, it's easier to clearly see the themes and then present the information in context of the themes. Some of my research for my dissertation was qualitative, and I used this method to organize the data. Because the data is representative of narratives, there's no way to really determine the reliability and validity of the data. It may be useful to validate or show the trustworthiness of the data by testing under multiple methods or multiple times or comparing against a different method. For example, I use narratives from a focus group as well as quantitative data results from survey data to further support and link the themes and thoughts. Click the movie icon to watch a video that explains more about qualitative research. I've also posted a link to this video in the content folder for this session. There are also 2 other videos in the content folder, one that explains a bit more about interviews and another that talks about focus groups. And I encourage you to watch those videos, particularly if you're thinking about using that type of research method. This is where I'm going to end this presentation. Be sure to read the chapters and complete any assignments and activities that are due this week. And as always, if you have any questions about anything, please be sure to reach out to me as soon as possible. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.